Hi, welcome to this video where we're going to be looking at how we can add metadata fields as quick parts into the document template of a document content type. Now, before we go too much further, just in case you're unaware of who 3Grow are, we're a SharePoint and Office 365 specialist training organisation based in Melbourne, Australia, covering the whole of the Asia Pacific region, offering courses in all aspects of Office 365, the Nintex tools, live tiles, other tools that we occasionally teach, things like InfoPath and Project Server as well. A little bit about myself. I'm Managing Director of 3Grow. I've been running training courses for over 15 years now. The last 10 or so of those years have been spent specializing in SharePoint. So during this session, we're going to go through a quick overview of content types, just to make sure we're all happy with what we mean by content types and the benefit that they provide within your information architecture of your SharePoint environment. We'll then just talk about what setup I've done for the demonstration, and then we'll go through the demonstration itself of adding quick parts into the document upon creation of the document, and then see how we can add those into the document template so they're already pre-populated when the end users come to create documents in the future. So the best way to describe content types, in my opinion, are the item templates. So anything that goes into any list or library in SharePoint is based on a content type. And that content type determines a variety of behaviors or characteristics of the items that are then based on them. Primarily things like metadata, so the column values, things like retention schedules within the information management policies. Workflows can also be assigned at the content type level, and as far as document content types are concerned, which of course is what we're going to be looking at within this video, document templates as well. So there's two main sides to content types, or two main benefits. One of those is the ability to have different, albeit similar, types of items within the same list or library. So in the screenshot you see there, we've got a library that is designed for containing meeting minutes and meeting agendas. The difference between them may be that the document template is likely to be different. The metadata might be slightly different. Maybe the person who approves meeting minutes is different from the person who approves agendas. Therefore, different workflows can be assigned at the content type level. And also, maybe the retention schedule is different as well. Maybe agendas are auto-archived after 6 months, whereas minutes are auto-archived after a year. On the flip side of that, the other benefit of content types is the ability to have the same type of item in different lists or libraries, all managed from one place, which is therefore the content types gallery within that site or that site collection, or even at the organizational level through the content type hub. So in the screenshots you see here, we've got the HR site and the sales site, both of which have the same content types available within this particular library. By updating the settings of the content type behind the scenes, that will impact every item based on that particular content type throughout the entire organization, not just new items created from that point onwards, but even existing items. So if we, for example, decide that we now need an additional piece of metadata for meeting minutes, we can add that at the content type level. Any new meeting minutes documents will then request that piece of metadata, and any existing minutes will also have the ability to have that piece of metadata set against them as well. So what I've done so far as the setup for the demonstration is concerned, I've got a site collection set up for the demo within which we have a library called meeting documents. I've also created another library called document templates, and we'll see where that will come into play a little bit later. So I've then created two content types, meeting minutes and meeting agendas. I have then uploaded the template for each of those into the document templates library. I've also then added both content types to the meeting documents library. So the end result is what we will see within the screenshots just a moment ago. Okay, so the next thing we're going to be doing is we're going to link the content type to the appropriate document template, and we're going to test that. What we'll then find is that the end user is expected to add the quick parts every time they create a new meeting minutes or meeting agenda document. So what we'll then do is we'll add the document content types, meeting minutes and meeting agenda, to the document templates library. So what we're then going to do is add the meeting minutes and meeting agenda content types to the document templates library. What this will then allow us to do is base the document templates on the appropriate content type, therefore making the quick parts available to be added into the document templates. What we will notice, however, is that because all of the columns associated with our meeting minutes and meeting agenda content types are mandatory, we'd have to pre-populate those within the document templates, meaning they will then be pre-populated every time someone creates a meeting minutes or meeting agenda document. So what we'll then do, before we can assign the templates to the appropriate content types within that templates library, we have to set all of the columns to optional. That will then allow us to assign the content types to the documents without populating any metadata. We'll then be able to pre-populate those templates with the quick parts. It is worth pointing out that we must use Word Desktop, not Word Online, not only when adding the quick parts themselves into the templates, but also when it comes to populating those quick parts within the Word experience. We can only do that within Word Desktop, not within Word Online. Therefore, what we're going to be doing is setting the meeting documents library to open browser compatible files within the desktop app, as opposed to the browser-based app, which is often the default for most Office 365 tenants. So it is worth pointing out that everything we're looking at here is applicable to all versions of SharePoint from at least version 2003. It's unlikely that anyone's going to be using a version quite that old. The demonstrations will be performed, however, within SharePoint Online. But as we said, these demonstrations are applicable to any version of SharePoint. Okay, so before we get to the demo itself, what I'm going to do is just show you what we've already set up as we talked about earlier. So first of all, I'll just open up the site settings of the sales site, which I'm using for my demos. And then just open up the site content types gallery. Within the gallery, you will see I've created the meeting minutes and meeting agenda content types. The only current difference between them is I have already set a document template for agenda, whereas minutes currently has no template specified. That means that whenever we choose to create a new document based on the meeting minutes content type, it will simply use the library level default template, which will normally be a blank Word document. The only other difference is that the meeting minutes content type has an additional column, which is the scribe property, to specify who took those minutes, which is not relevant for agendas. Within the document templates library, I have uploaded the document templates for agenda and minutes. And as I mentioned, I have already assigned the agenda template to the agenda content type. And we'll then see the result of that within the meeting document, where I have assigned those two content types to that library. Now, the next thing that we're going to do, as I mentioned previously, is we need to, through the library settings, specify that the library should open browser compatible documents within the desktop application rather than within the browser. Because the quick parts that we're going to be adding in, it's only possible to add those, and it's also only possible to populate those within the desktop version of Word rather than the browser version. So through the advanced settings, we have the default open behavior for browser enabled documents. We're going to force this library to open in the client application by default. So now what we'll find is when we choose to create a new document within the meeting documents library, when we choose the agenda content type, which does already have a document template specified within the settings of that content type, it brings up the agenda template. Whereas if we choose to create a new meeting minutes document, it will be using a blank Word document, which is the default template specified at the library level. So let's now go through the process of assigning the document template to the content type. So into the templates library, as we said before, we already have this meeting minutes document template. Now, one way we can generate a link to a document is by selecting that document and choosing to copy link. However, the resulting link is not a particularly clean link, and we'll notice that it won't actually work properly when we then add that link into the settings of the content type. So the way that I find is a more consistent and reliable way of doing it is to first copy the URL of the library. It's worth pointing out that anything from forms onwards isn't technically part of the URL of the library. It's simply specifying which view is currently being used at this present moment in time. So we'll omit that from what's highlighted when we therefore copy it. Now we know that the template that we're looking for is simply called meetingminutes.docx. So we can just remember that, or you could go back and copy that separately. What we then need to do is back into the settings of the site and open up the meeting minutes content type within the content types gallery. Then within the advanced settings of the meeting minutes content type, we have two options, one of which is to upload a document template into the settings of the content type. That's not what we want in this instance. We want to point it to an existing template that already exists within SharePoint. So we can paste the URL of the library and then simply add meetingminutes.docx to the end of that URL. OK to confirm. And now when we go back to the meeting documents library and choose to create a new document based on that content type, it will now be using the meeting minutes document template rather than the blank Word template. Now what we'll find at the moment is that if we choose to insert quick parts, which is where we would normally find the appropriate metadata, we'll notice that none of the meeting minutes related columns are available. Now the reason is within the document templates library, the document template is currently based on the document content type, which doesn't have any of those columns available. And until it's saved within this library, and therefore based on the meeting minutes content type, those columns won't be available at all. So what we'll do is simply save this document into that library. And just specify a file name for now. At the point of saving that document, it will then base it on the appropriate content type. And when we then choose to insert quick parts, by inserting quick parts document property, we now have the appropriate fields available to be added into the document template. Now the problem that we'll find here is that we're playing the role of an end user, meaning that we're expecting end users to know how to add quick parts into their document, which I don't believe is particularly realistic. So what we ideally want to do is pre-populate the document template with those quick parts. So therefore the user simply needs to add the properties into the quick parts rather than having to add the quick parts every time. In order to achieve this, within the document templates library, we'll need to add the quick parts into the meeting minutes document template. Now, at the present moment in time, this meeting minutes document template is based on the generic document content type, which means that if I choose to open that within Word and then attempt to insert quick parts, those quick parts simply are not available. For the same reason, we didn't see those quick parts before the document was saved into the meeting documents library and therefore based on the appropriate content type. So before we can add the quick parts, the meeting minutes document template needs to be based on the meeting minutes content type. So through the library settings, the first thing I need to do is allow management of content types through the advanced settings of that library. You will notice there are no content types related settings available in the library settings at the moment. So by going to advanced settings, the first option we see is allow management of content types. What we'll then find is that we see the content types section of settings. I can then add from existing site content types. And I've got my meeting minutes and meeting agenda content types available within the 3GROW group. So I can simply add those two over into this library. Now when we go back to the document templates library and choose to create a new document, not that we will, but just to show that we now have those content types available within this library. The next step is to then base the meeting minutes document onto the meeting minutes content type, therefore making those metadata fields available. If we therefore use the information panel, the very first field that we'll see when editing properties will be the content type. As you can see, the default content type is document, meaning the only metadata we have is the name and the title. By changing that to meeting minutes, we'll now see meeting minutes related metadata. The problem that we find here though is that we now need to populate that metadata against that document, which is not appropriate because this is the document that will be used as the meeting minutes template. Therefore, what we're going to do is go back into the library settings and within the meeting minutes content type, this content type that we see through the library settings is the copy of that content type that's being used within this library. Therefore, what we're able to do is set meeting date, meeting location, chairperson and scribe as optional properties so that we're not then forced to enter that metadata against the template itself. Any changes we make here within the library level version of this content type will not impact anything outside of this library. Amending the site content type will pass the settings down to any library that uses it and therefore any item based on it. Whereas in this instance, it will only impact anything based on that content type within this library, the document templates library. Having done that, back into the document templates library, we will notice that if we then reselect the meeting minutes content type and go to the information panel, those columns are no longer mandatory. So now the meeting minutes document template is based on the meeting minutes content type. If we then choose to open that document within Word Desktop, we'll then be able to insert the appropriate quick parts into the document template. So via the Insert tab of the ribbon, Insert Quick Parts, Document Property, and here we can insert the meeting date, meeting location, the chairperson, and also the scribe, the person who took the minutes. Having inserted the quick parts, we can then simply close and save the meeting minutes template. Now we don't need to go back and update the content type. The content type is already pointing to the appropriate template. The URL of the document template hasn't changed. All we've done is updated what's at the end of that link. So therefore, when we go back to the meeting documents library And now when we choose to create a new meeting minutes document, you'll see that it is still based on the template as it was previously, but now with the ability to allow users to input the appropriate metadata straight into the document. What you will notice is with some fields, we are unable to input the values within the quick parts themselves. This is primarily anything regarding a lookup to another list within the SharePoint site, or often people and groups columns will also, it won't allow you to populate those there. However, what we can do is via the File tab, we can then insert properties through here instead. You may even find that when we choose to insert those properties through the File tab, they're also not available. The trick here is to simply choose to close and save the document. At that point, it'll be basing that document on the appropriate content type within the meeting documents library. It will then validate against the appropriate metadata, and it will then highlight if there are any metadata columns that are deemed mandatory. Up until the point we choose to save the document into the meeting documents library, those columns are still deemed optional, because until it's saved, the file we have open is essentially the meeting minutes template from the document templates library. So we've now saved the document. We don't need to check it in yet. So you will notice within the meeting documents library, I have modified the view to include columns to specify the content type, meeting date, meeting location, chairperson, and also the scribe. By selecting our new document, we can then use the information panel to input the last couple of values. Once we've input those values, we will then be able to save and check in that document. So I'll just specify myself as both the chairperson and the scribe. And notice it is validating against your organizational users. Now that all mandatory metadata has been populated, we will be able to check in that file. So although we weren't initially able to populate that metadata through the document itself, if we then choose to open that document in Word, having populated the metadata through the SharePoint site, we will notice that that information is now present within the document itself. So any changes that we make within the document will then be reflected within SharePoint. So if I just change the meeting date to the 25th of July, close and save that document, that value will then update within the meeting date column within the library. And similarly, if I then modify, for example, the meeting location through the SharePoint library, and then open the document either in Word Desktop or Word Online, those values will then be present. So that's how we add metadata fields into our content type document template. Hopefully you've found that useful. Thank you for taking the time to watch the video. If you have any questions regarding the video or if there's anything else that we can do to help, feel free to get in touch.